Perfect. Okay. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for joining this morning. My name's Lindsay. I work for Edmentum, which is the parent company over Study Island and Xactpath, two of the programs that My Tech High offers as a homeroom resource. And so today we just really wanted to briefly give you kind of an overview of both of those programs and some ways that you can look at some pieces from the student side to understand if your students are making adequate progress. I know a lot of us aren't doing traditional end-of-year testing with our students. We're not doing state testing. And so I want to show you some ways that you can look at the data and what your students are doing in either of these programs or what they could be doing to help you identify if that progress is being made, if your students are on track. So we're going to start with Xactpath. If you know anything about Xactpath, or if your students have spent any time in Xactpath, you know that Xactpath starts with an adaptive diagnostic test, meaning that it's an assessment that the students take that adapts or changes as they're responding to the questions. So if your students are doing really well and answering a lot of questions right, the test is going to get progressively more challenging for them, and we'll start presenting them with questions from a higher grade level. And if they're struggling, we might take it down a little and give them more easier questions or lower grade level questions to help identify their curriculum score, that grade level that they're working at. And the test is really good, the algorithm is really good at identifying those gaps in math, reading, and language arts. You have 3 different assessments that the students can take. As soon as they finish that assessment, they're given a learning path right away, a series of activities to work on that's going to be specifically tailored to the gaps that we identified in that adaptive assessment. Xactpath is a K-12 program. So if you have a 6th grade student that is just above and beyond working on, 9th and 10th grade material, the test will identify that and assign them the right curriculum to work on. If you have a 4th grade student who's really struggling in math, we might be giving them kinder or 1st grade skills to adapt to their needs or to help meet their needs. So with that little background, I'm actually just going to jump live into the program, and let's take a look at this from a student perspective. What does it look like for our learners? I'm just logging in as a fake student right now, so we're not looking at any sensitive student data, but I'm just going to log in. Whoops. As this little fake student here. This interface might look familiar to you. If you have students that are in older grade levels, like 6th grade on up, this interface might look a little childish to you and unfamiliar. We do change the interface for our older students, so it does look a little more mature, but this is the elementary interface that we're looking at. A couple of things I'll just point out in case you haven't spent time in this program yet. If the students have a diagnostic test that's been assigned to them and that's available to take, it will appear on their home screen just like you see here. So you can see this student is midway through a reading diagnostic. You can see there's that continue button to continue working on that diagnostic. On the left-hand side, traditionally, our students will spend time on their learning path. That's those series of activities that they've been assigned based on how they did on the diagnostic. So in this case, this student is working on their math learning path, and every single skill that we assign to a student will give them a lesson to help them learn that skill, some practice questions to give them exposure to that content, and then a 5-question quiz to determine if they're ready to move on to the next skill. As soon as they finish the 4 or 5 skills that we give them in their learning path, then this little trophy icon that you see right here will unlock, allowing the students to take a 20-question test to see if they're ready to move on to the next skill, next series of skills. So we always do these little progress checks along the way to make sure that they know that they're really confident enough to move on to the next series of skills in their learning path. That's the quick overview. What I really want to look at with you is the data that's available for your students, which you can also see. On the left-hand side of my screen here, scrolling to the bottom, there is a button that says Reports. And I'm going to click on that. When we're talking about data in Xactpath, we really can look at 2 main metrics. We can either look at how did they do on their diagnostic test, or how are they doing on their learning path. And that's what we're going to explore today. I'm going to view this student summary report. And you'll notice at the top, we do break it down by learning path data, what progress are they making, and diagnostic data. I'm just going to highlight a couple things on this diagnostic data area. It starts by giving you an overview of how the students are doing. Currently, my student is in progress on that reading test and hasn't been assigned these other tests. But I'm going to come to math because I know this student took the first diagnostic earlier in the year. So we're going to take a look at some of their diagnostic data. And once it loads, while it is thinking heavily, we might jump over to the learning path data and see if that's a little quicker to load. So we're going to highlight two areas in the actual learning path data. How many trophies has a student earned, and what skills are they working on? Starting with the skills, I can see based on the student's diagnostic test, what content they assessed above. The student didn't need to work on place value or reading and writing numbers. When they took that diagnostic test, the program identified, you already know those skills. But it did find a few gaps there, like the student wasn't strong at counting or addition and subtraction properties. And so those were assigned to the student, and the student subsequently mastered them. So we can see kind of what gaps have been filled in, and then what the student is currently working on. We can see that this particular student is doing a lot of work in second grade. And as I scroll down, I can expand that third grade content to see the other third grade skills that they're currently dabbling in. When we use this term trophy, however, we're asking, did they truly master this skill based on that progress check test that we have them take every 4 skills or so? And if they're able to answer 4 out of 5 questions correct on that progress check, then we'll consider it a mastered skill and give them a little trophy for it. So that's what we're looking at here. Is this student successfully mastered counting numbers, addition and subtraction properties? I can see the date that they mastered it and their score that they received. So this is helpful to just take a look at what skills are they working on and what have they already been able to successfully master. I'm going to give one more attempt at getting this to load before I just reload it. Awesome. So I'm looking at their diagnostic data for math. It's the exact same report we were just looking at. For this particular student, they haven't been scheduled for the second diagnostic, but I do want to look at how they did on the first diagnostic test that they took. Just so you know, you can have the student take the diagnostic test multiple times throughout the year. For this first diagnostic, the first number that I see is the student's national percentile ranking, what you'll see referred to as NPR throughout the program. That national percentile ranking is just letting us know where your student lines up with other students in the same grade level across the US that have taken this diagnostic test. If you're familiar with percentiles, and I am not a statistician, but if you're familiar with percentiles, if a student earned a score higher than the 50th percentile, they're above average compared to their peers, and below the 50th percentile would mean they're below average in comparison to their peers. This particular second grader is in the 86th percentile, so they're doing well better than their peers. And then you can also see their just raw score. But what I want to highlight for you in case it's of interest is you can get a sense of what skills were assessed when they actually took that diagnostic. Here I'm looking at the domains that would have been presented, and I can expand any of these to see, oh, my student was given the second grade skill of real world problems, and they got 1 out of 1 question correct. When it came to the third grade version of that same skill, real world problems, they were not able to answer those correctly. They got 0 out of 2 correct. So this is kind of an interesting report to go through and see what was my student's experience like on that diagnostic test, what type of skills were they assessed on, what grade level was that content being pulled from, and where did they really shine. And so you can see it probably is appropriate that the student was given a late second, early third grade learning path to work on, because they really struggled with those 4th and 5th grade skills, even some of those 3rd grade skills. But you could go through and open up any of these domains to see what types of questions were being presented and what individual skills was the student working on that diagnostic test. There's a question in the chat that really, Jamie, might be more appropriate for you. When can a new student begin using the homeroom resources?
Yes, for students that are joining our program for the 21-22 school year, all students will have access to their homeroom resources. A lot of it depends on when your schedules have been approved and we've like solidified that you're part of the program. The goal is always to have those login credentials emailed out to our families by the first day of the program, but for sure by August 31st is our goal, when we have all students have access to their homeroom resources.
Awesome.
If you are already part of the program, you have access to these. These can be found under homeroom. You can find the login credentials for your students. They should have been emailed out to you at the beginning of the school year, or in the mid-year if you joined us in mid-year. Yeah, in section 11 of Parent Link is where you can find more details about all of our homeroom resources and how to access them.
Awesome. Really, 3 last things I want to say about Xactpath before we move over to Study Island. The first one is, those of you that do already have access to this as a homeroom resource, you have access through the summer. So please don't think that you're trapped into a traditional school year. Take as much advantage of it over the summer as you would like. Second thing I want to share with you is that Xactpath is one of the unique programs of Edmentum's where there is essentially the option for a parent account. It's really a teacher account, but you're only seeing your students. You're not able to see other students' data. If you are at all interested in getting a parent version of the account, which would allow you to monitor your students' progress a little closer, as well as assign some supplemental resources, there is a way to do that. And Trisha, were you successful in finding that way?
Yes, I was.
Awesome.
I sent the link to Jamie, so she has the link to fill out that Google form for parents who are interested in getting teacher access.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Trisha. I appreciate it. And the last thing I'll say about Xactpath before we move over to Study Island is just about the research. So we had a third company partner with us to do some research on the effectiveness of Xactpath. And what they found, it was the Marzano group. What they found was that if students spend 30 minutes per subject per week on their learning path, then we'll see an increase on their next diagnostic test. So 30 minutes per subject per week is not a huge time commitment, especially because the data showed that it doesn't need to be 30 minutes at once. It can be 2 15-minute sections. It could be 3 10-minute sections of working on their learning path. So a pretty small time investment to have essentially a guaranteed growth measurement available. I want to give time for some Q&A on Xactpath before. Is that okay, Jamie? Before we move on to Study Island, let's do it like that. Let's just open it up to a few questions on Xactpath, and then we'll move over to Study Island. Go ahead and take yourself off mute or type into the chat, whatever you're most comfortable with.
Sometimes it's just a matter of taking it all in.
I'm fine if there are no questions, but I want to give you about 30 more seconds just to sit on that for a second and think, is there something else I need, additional information I need about this?
Rachel asked, can you show it for a 4th grader?
Just meaning the screen looks different, and mine didn't look like that, and I couldn't even find reports when I had first looked at it.
Reports, are you currently not seeing reports in your student's account?
Sorry, I pushed mute. I need to go back and check again, but when I had my daughter take the test the first time and I went and scrolled down and tried to find everything, all my things were blank in Xactpath.
I think that the reports feature was shared more recently from my tech's administrative account.
Oh.
So they might not have been there at the start of the year when you looked, but I feel like we pushed those out. I could be really wrong.
It was at mid-year.
It was
So
at
I'll go back
mid-year.
and check. Yeah.
Will you take a look and check? Because from a 4th grade perspective, there's not going to be a huge difference on the interface. It looks a little less animated, but there should still be that reports feature. The 6 through 12 account is pretty dramatically different, and I'll show that just in case that's relevant to anyone on the call.
Okay, thank you.
is just way more mature looking. So you can see a little drier, not nearly as cutesy, but the exact same information. The students have their diagnostic tests as well as their learning paths to work on. One big difference from the learning paths from this 6 through 12 perspective is that the students don't have to work in order. You see, they can start with introduction to triangles and then jump to solving subtraction story problems. So they can go in any order versus our younger learners really are required to go in order on those skills. But they should still see those My Rewards, which is going to show them the kind of challenges that they've met or the successes that they've had. But there should be, and I don't know if I've shared reports into this account, could be the problem. This account I haven't shared reports. So Rachel, I would appreciate if you just look and maybe give Jamie some feedback if you're still not seeing those reports on the student side, and Jamie can let me know and we can dig into that together.
Thank you.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions about their Xactpath or Edmentum products or accounts, you're always welcome to email us at help@mytechhigh.com and we can get you in contact with Lindsay. She's amazing.
Thank you. All right, let's take a look at Study Island. And really, before we jump too much further into Study Island, let me just take just a minute to describe to you what it is that we're looking at together. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment. If you haven't used Study Island before, Study Island is pretty different from Xactpath, both in execution and really its purpose. Study Island is designed to be a standards mastery program. So it has all of the topics and standards aligned to your state standards and a deep bank of questions for each of those standards. So it gives the students a chance to practice that content. They get feedback along the way. They'll get explanations. So they'll know not just did I get the question right or wrong, but why was that right? Why was that wrong? And then we also have built-in remediation. So if a student is really struggling with an on-grade level skill, we'll take them down a grade level. If that's not working for them, we'll continue to drop them down grade levels until we figure out really where they're supposed to be working and allow them to work their way back up. It doesn't have a lot of instructional pieces like we saw Xactpath does. Xactpath has those really robust lessons and scaffolded practice and then an assessment afterwards. Study Island is just that pure practice and standard mastery portion. So I'm going to jump into a student Study Island account. And let's just take a look at a couple things. The interface doesn't change here a lot based on grade levels. So our early elementary are really going to have a similar interface to our middle and high school students. In Study Island, every time you master a topic, we call it a blue ribbon. They earn a blue ribbon in the program. And so you'll see on this dashboard for the student how many blue ribbons they have earned in math in this case. We see a list of suggested topics. These are topics that the student really seems to be struggling with. And so we're just giving them some feedback that you might want to do a little more work on these particular skills. From the left-hand side of your account or your student's account, they should see their state available. I'm going to click on Utah, which is where I live, and I think many of you live. They should see their grade level and then the ability to select a subject. I'm going to click on math. Here we see a list of every single topic that's available for this subject and grade level. So I'm looking at all of the Utah third grade math skills listed out in the order that they would probably be taught in a typical year and grouped together by these reporting categories or strands. Because the student has done a lot of work in third grade math, you'll see these little blue ribbons indicating mastery. You'll see a column indicating their best score as well as their overall score. And if it's interesting to you, you'll also see that indicator or that state alignment that you can click on and see exactly where that topic aligns to state standards. When the student sees this screen, they can click on any skill to get a nice little overview or a reminder of that particular skill in the form of a lesson. These are not robust lessons like we saw in Xactpath. They really are usually just maybe a 1 or 2 page overview. In this case, 3 pages with some sample questions just to remind them some basics of this skill. So they'll see those lessons. Sometimes you'll see flashcards as well, which is a great way for the students to just run through that skill briefly before taking the assessment. So they can kind of quiz themselves and say, okay, I'm feeling good about this topic. I think I'm ready to start the assessment. But then the actual assessment is called practice. Practice is where you see 10 randomly selected questions on this particular skill. When the student clicks practice, it will take them to a randomly selected question, which they'll respond to, get feedback, and that explanation. If they're getting questions wrong, usually several in a row or right off the bat in this case, we'll pop that explanation open for them like you see it here. They'll need to read over it before dismissing it and then move on to the next question. So that explanation is there for every single question in Study Island. If a student is doing like I'm doing and they're not really paying attention or they're having a hard time focusing, or they just realize I'm not prepared for this particular topic, they may get some feedback like this that says, are you guessing? Because right now you're getting every single question wrong. We need you to wait 10 seconds before you answer the next question. So it makes me kind of stare at this question and really think about it for a second. In this situation, it might make sense for the student to say, I'm not ready for this assessment. I'm going to come back after I've read the lesson, after I've gone through some of the flashcards, and I'm going to click Save Session to come back to it when I'm a little more prepared. And so it will take the student right back to their screen. It tells me here that I'm in progress on this skill, so it knows that I've started it, but I certainly haven't finished all 10 randomly selected questions. Scrolling down, you may notice a few other symbols, like real world problems has this little hazard symbol next to it. I got a 3 out of 10 or 30%. And so the program's identifying that this is a skill I, as a student, might need a little more support on. I'm really not ready to start working on this. And as a result, it's actually disabled this 3rd grade version of the topic. When I try and click on it, it says, we really need you to work on that supporting version, that foundational version, that 2nd grade version of the skill before we have you work on real world problems. And so directly beneath it, you'll see a different skill listed out, which the program has assigned to me. It is the 2nd grade skill of multiplication and division facts. And so while I can't work on the 3rd grade skill of real world problems, I can work on this more foundational version of the skill. And hopefully once I master that, then I would be able to work back on grade level. And so the students will see that remediation. It will take place automatically. So there's nothing that you as the parent need to do. But I would say if I were looking from a growth perspective, are my students making adequate progress for the year? The goal would be for your students to be able to master or get that little blue ribbon on every single topic presented on grade level. Because there is a best score and an overall score, the overall score is going to be an aggregate of all of their attempts, but their best score, we're really just shooting for 70%. Can they get at least 7 out of 10 of these questions correct? So if they can, that blue ribbon will show up right away. It's a pretty straightforward program, and I think really helpful for the students to both get practice and feel successful in mastering those skills. But that is, in my mind, the best way to measure progress in Study Island is, are they able to earn blue ribbons or achieve blue ribbons on all of those on grade level skills? If you feel like you have a student that is exceptionally bright or really struggling with on grade level skills, you will notice that they have the ability to toggle to a different grade level. And so if you just think assigning your 3rd grade student 3rd grade content will be an exercise in frustration, they can access that 2nd grade content, or conversely, you could have them working on 6th or 7th grade content in there as well. So really great way for them to find the material that's best suited for them, but it is intended to be, traditionally at least, an on grade level program. You may notice some reports here on the left-hand side. We do offer reports to our students. You're welcome to play around with those from the student perspective, but honestly, from my standpoint, most of my families that I work with end up relying on this suggested topics report as the skills that are most direly needed to be addressed. That's kind of the basic overview of Study Island, not nearly as many bells and whistles or things to show you in comparison to Xactpath. We have a great question coming in from Ms. Hargrove. Is Study Island 2 to 12? It's actually K to 12, although K and 1 is a little bit hidden. We house kinder and 1st grade under our national program. So when your students are playing around, if they need kinder or 1st grade content, that's going to be under US programs on the left-hand side of your screen. They can access that kinder content. as well as first grade content, and some other kind of fun things that you may want to poke around into. Like we have some graphic novels in there, some Spanish content, some NGSS stuff. So poke around in that national material and see if there's something else that you would want your students to be working on.